Yeah. All of you confused enough whether you should use web forms or MVC? That's the intent, no? If you can't convince, you should confuse at least. So you'll go back thinking, what should I be using there? What about HTML5? Is it supported in IE or not? That's the first question. You get enough confusion so you can go and think about what I should be doing there. Whatever standards are approved by the body, it's supported by IE, right? And whenever you're looking at web forms versus MVC, it's a matter of effort you put initially or effort you put at the end, basically. Initially, you have to do a lot of work in MVC because you do it everything yourself. Control is not there, grid view is not there. So a lot of work is by you manually. But the ability to change things faster at a later stage of cycle is very good in MVC. Also, it is a test-driven project development model, so you can easily do test-driven development. And also, the helpers in Razor will help you do a lot of things. Like tomorrow, if you want to integrate PayPal or you want to integrate some other thing, you don't have to wait for Microsoft to release a control or a patch for that, because the community is keeping on developing helpers for the common tasks that we do. Like chart you saw there, that's actually something developed by community. And you already saw things like helpers on WebGrid and all, these are all there by Microsoft itself. So MVC is very powerful if you are looking at a long-term development where you want to do custom development of how the URLs look like, etc. That time MVC is very powerful. If you are looking at something to do rapid application development, or if you are looking at SharePoint-based development, web forms is the best option to go for, because SharePoint is always on web forms, ASP.NET web forms. So the control-based architecture of web forms is a double-edged sword. One is that you get to do things quickly, but then there are a lot of things that happen without your knowledge. And without that, you can actually complete an application. Many people can do that without knowing what's actually happening in the page life cycle. It's only an interview question. But after that, you don't need to know really what's happening in the page life cycle, because everything is automated in web forms, right? What we see is when you do a high performance application, these kind of things are very important to know what's happening internally. And as much as we try to do it in web forms, it always has this abstraction of what it does internally. And that's kind of very complicated when you want to do fine tuning of your applications there, right? So that's the, hope it added enough confusion to you. So the last session is going to start. It's on code first development with Entity Framework. So we have seen a lot of sessions today. We saw about HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, etc. All these things are from the UI perspective. We have seen the markup languages like MVC, HTML, etc. We also have seen the data access layer to some extent. We saw about Entity Framework to some extent in the previous session, and also in the session before that, Entity Model and all this. Entity Framework is the data access layer that you would use for developing your data applications. Like earlier, if you think you used to do typically ADO.NET data set, data reader, data adapter, etc. for doing development there, but it does not solve a particular problem, which is iterating through a list of records. For example, if you want to iterate through a list of records and get a value in a data reader or data adapter for that matter, there is no real easy way to do it, because it does not have the iQueryable attribute. It only has an IEnumerable attribute in data set or data adapter for that matter, right? If you want to do something like find a record where the age is greater than 32, there is only one way. You can do a loop of the records. Okay? It's only IEnumerable. But in a link-based development environment, you can do iQueryable. You can using the iQueryable interface. You can do a dot where, and then specify that the condition is going to be age is greater than 20 or something like that. That gives the flexibility of doing it there. And also, it's a very good abstraction of what is happening between your UI layer and data access layer, clearly there, right? So Entity Framework has been there for some time now. We released Entity Framework way back in 2008, which came as version 1, version 2, 3 came. Version 4 is what is shipped currently with .NET 4.0. So that has several enhancements, like for example, pluralization of entities. When you create an entity called as product, you always know that it's going to be products collection, right? Basically, it's going to be products, because product is only one entity, and when you have a collection of entities, it's going to be products. So that pluralization thing came in .NET 4.0, and many other things that came there. But fundamentally, when you use Entity Framework, the way it works is you have a database that is already there. You go and create an entity model. I think you have seen it enough times in the morning. And you go and create it there. It creates an EDMX file, correct? So that's what it happens currently. We saw already about this. There was also link to SQL. There are questions around link to SQL and Entity Framework. Link to SQL is particularly useful when you are just working with SQL Server, and it has got a mapping of table to class. Only one you can do that. You can't club multiple tables and create an entity in link to SQL. So there is a limitation in link to SQL there. And the recommendation is actually to use Entity Framework, not link to SQL. In fact, internally it will use link to entities for working with Entity Framework. And there are also data application blocks which you probably used earlier, but we'll not talk about that now. So entity framework, right? So it's used in combination with link to entities. Like I mentioned earlier, when you create an entity model, internally it will use link for querying and updating records and maintaining the data persistence, etc. It has a powerful API. So the data context or the object context that is created is actually very powerful, that it works across connected systems, it works across disconnected systems like RIA services, it works across a spectrum of all services. It's a recommended approach for web forms and definitely MVC. MVC will not support things like data adapter, reader, etc. It requires a data model definitely. And it works with web forms, dynamic data, MVC, all stuff there. So what is Entity Framework 4.1? How many of you have this question? What is Entity Framework 4.1? Okay, only one person, rest of all? When is session ending is the question you have? Okay, good. So it was RTW recently. What it means is it just came to production. It includes support for code first development, right? What does this mean? No matter how much we talk about Entity Framework or a data access layer from Microsoft, there is always this SQL Server dependency that we have, right? It works on SQL Server. It's like our development cycle. It works on my machine. It works on my machine, but like that, it works on SQL Server, right? And that's actually good because we have a full powerful API called a SQL data client, etc. But what people ask also is things like data agnostic data access layer, right? I want my application to work. Customer will come and say, your application should work on the desktop, on the device, on Wi-Fi, on mobile, on the plane, whatever they want to do, right? And if you want to do something like that, also they will ask, it should work for SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, and NoSQL, all this, right? Complex requirement, right? So when you do this kind of things, what happens is, it becomes very difficult to create it from re-engineering, right? I will show re-engineering sample initially. Re-engineering is basically you have a database and create entity from that, right? That's what we do typically. That's what I shown so far there. But if you create a class and then do a database, which means that you are independently designing a data access layer and then deciding what database to use, right? That's what is the Entity Framework code first model that shows there. It works with the existing database. So not that you have to create databases again, and it can also generate database from plain old CLR objects, POCO, which is classes basically, nothing but classes. So building an MVC application with Entity Framework database first, so we'll see that to begin with. So let's say I want to create a new Visual Studio project for this. So we'll create a new solution, so we'll have the samples in the same solution. We want to have other project types and create a Visual Studio solution and give this a name, say code first samples. Okay, so it's a blank solution that we created there. And when you use database first, what it means is that you are saying that I have a database already there and I want to use that to use Entity Framework, right? This is what I showed to you already, but there is a difference what I'm going to show you in a second. So add new project. I want to create a new web project based on Visual C#, and it's going to be called as EF database first, right? So it's an MVC application on there. So it asks me the same set of questions. If it's going to be an internet application and it's going to use the view engine as Razor and creates that there, right? I have a database already there. If you see this database, it's basically simple two tables there. Select star from questions. So I asked a lot of these questions from the morning, right? Do you like it? Do you work on this thing, etc.? It's very hard to remember all these questions and answers, right? So let's say I want to create new query and use the tables available there. Select star from questions. There's nothing there, and select star from answer choices. There's nothing there either, right? Two tables, but you can see that there are just 3 columns there. And the idea is like, I ask a lot of questions to you. Do you know this? Do you know that, etc.? Are you working on this, etc.? It's very hard to maintain this information on my head, right? What if you can have an engine or poll which you can use to enter these values? Like for example, this is something that we built on Entity Framework and MVC3. So this is something where you can go online and vote for the sessions today, right? Just that I have to change the speakers for some of the sessions, but you can actually go today and register for this site and vote there. This is built out of MVC3 and code first, so you can actually go and check out this sample there. The source code is not available yet there. We can talk about the terms later about the source code. So as of now, you just have access to the application for free. You can register and then go and give the vote for this, right? Right, so this is the database I have, and I want to quickly create this there. So the M here is the model, obviously, right? Model will come from my ADO.NET entity model, So I can say I want to use a data template, which is entity model for me, and I just leave the default name called as model1.edmx. What it does is that it gives me two options: generate from database, which is what I want to do now, and I can connect to my database, which is called as Pole. I think it's called Pole, I think. Yeah, I'll go for Pole basically. So I think I'll use Pole and repeat the same two queries. Probably I have some answers already. Let me run this here. Yeah, I have some samples already. So I have some questions already. So I'll use Pole and I'll use this connection string, and it's now retrieving my database tables. I think you have seen this already, so I'm quickly going through this. It's finding out that I have two tables called as questions and answer choices, and I have done with my model, right? So it's showing me the two tables there, answers and question choices there. But when you go here and find out this, what is created here, EDMX, this is the design file, right? But when you go to the code file here, let's just see what's happening here. There are two things created here. One is the entities for the classes, and then the context, which is holding all this value there. And it's doing hell a lot of work here, if you see here. If you go here and open the factory methods, if you open the EDM file there, if you open navigation property, it's actually generated a lot of code for you automatically, right? So for example, if you want to open the partial methods available, if you want to find out what are the methods there, that's like number of lines of code increases there. And this is good if you are working on a complex scenario where you have a RIA services front end, you have a ASP.NET MVC application running there, you have a service layer in between. All this is good because this has to do the persistence of data across different layers, right? And it has to do all this work there. But mine is a simple database table, right? Only two tables. All I require is a questions table and an answer choice table, that's all. So for that, this is actually a lot of work there. And the idea of Entity Framework 4.1 is to simplify this process. So how do I do that? So right click here and then I can say add code generation item. There is a new template called as Aereo.NET DB context generator. You will get to see this DB context quite frequently because there are two things newly in Entity Framework 4.1, DB context and DB set. Right? If you skip this part and see what's here holding everything tightly together here is the object context. The object context is something that generically derives from system.data. So if you just step into this, go to definition, it actually designs from system.data.objects. It's a very generic object for holding any set of database records. It can hold multiple database tables. It can hold multiple databases itself and do a lot of work there and do persistence, storage, etc. But what we want to do is simplify this process. So when you say right click and then say add code generation item, it gives you this new template called as Aereo.NET DB context generator, right? And then again I leave the default name called as model1 and click on add. So you'll notice two things there. One, it creates a couple of files, and two, I'll quickly show that to you. So it's done its work. So when I build this now, it has done a couple of work. It has created a context file. Like all the Entity Framework requires a context. It needs to be a context where it holds all the information. That's the context file it created there. And also it created a couple of class files now. Question is a class file which has got ID, question text attributes, and answer choice is again a class file which has got a couple of files there. And then this one is wiped out. EDMX code that was there, all the chunk of code is removed now because it's thinking that it needs to be simplified into simple classes now, right? So everything is gone here now. There's nothing there in the EDMX file there. This is a much simpler way of representing your data model, right? So once that is there, I can go and create my own controller here. So when I say add controller, I can give this a name, questions controller, and this is going to be coming from model class called as question, which is the class file, and the data context class for this is going to be Pole entities, right? And when I do add, what it's doing currently is that it's taking up the class name and it's taking up the context name and generating all the options for me. It is doing creating of create, update, delete views and also creating the controller file for me. So it has done that. You can see there is questions controller which does a bunch of things. Index will get a list of all the questions. Details will go into each question and use this property called as .find by ID. That's what you see here, right? And then it does a lot of other things like save, edit, etc. options which are default values that you want to do there, right? So it has done the questions there. Similarly, if I want to do it for answers, add controller, I want to give this a name answer choices, and this is going to be coming from the model class called answer choice, and it remembers the old entry called as Pole entities there, right? So that's the Entity Framework model for me. So when you work with Entity Framework, you require two things. You require a class which has the attributes like integer, value, all these things there, and also a context which will store this class persistence. That's what it's doing there currently. So when you're done with this, when you run this application, you can now navigate to questions, and because it generated everything automatically, you can see there is a list view for the questions there. I can go and create more questions from here, right? Like what should I use? Web forms or MVC? You can go and create this question here. And you can also see that there are some answer options already given by me. So answer choices controller, I can go here and find out that create new, use VB is an option I'm giving. And so you can see that it's actually finding out that question is a nested table. So it's finding out that question is an ID attribute and gets the actual value of question instead of question ID, right? So what should I use? I just say use VB. Next option, what do you want to give? Try a different occupation. So yeah, something like fishing or something, no? So this is two options I've created there. So this one used the database first approach. So what I did clearly, I had database, questions and answer choices, and I want to create a model on this. The regular EDMX file is so chunked with a lot of code which is not required for me. I added a code generation item which will simplify this into simple classes like question, answer choices and a context file. And finally I had to just go and say add controller to generate all the methods here, right? This is the database first approach that you look at when you do a development in Entity Framework there, right? So model first, right? So many times when you work with Entity Framework, you think, okay, there is a model design that you see there, right? I want to design my database first and then go and generate database from that, because I want to design classes, design how it looks like, columns, values, etc., and then go and generate database from that. Much simpler than working with existing database for me, right? So model first is again an approach which is supported in Entity Framework 4.1. Like for example, in this solution, I want to create a new project, add new project. Let's use the same MVC3 application, and this is going to be EF model first. And so how do you close all these files? Any idea? Close the solution. Right click, close all but this, right? I learned it very late. Actually, last month I was closing everything manually. I even thought of getting somebody to work for me for that. So here I have this database first approach is fine. Model is there. So here I want to do the same step here, add new item, and this is going to be a data that comes there from ADO.NET entity model. And the only difference here is that I don't want to generate it from database. I want it to come from empty model. This is the model first approach where you create the model first and then tell that I want database from here, right? So how do I do that? I can go and add entities, saying that my entity is going to be called as question, and you can see it automatically pluralizes question to questions, which means question is an entity, entity collection is questions. And then it has a primary property called as ID, automatically there. Every entity framework table requires a primary key and it has to be an integer, needless to say, and it needs to be there. Otherwise, entity framework will mark the table as read only. Read only. You can't go and update that table. If it has to be a primary key, it has to be integer. You can make it integer 64 if you want, but that's what I know currently. So this has a question ID, and you want to add one more column, you can hit the insert key and say this is going to be question text, right? And this is by default a string envarchar that you can see here. So the property window says that it's going to be an envarchar here. Right click, properties. This question text is a string, so I don't have any problems here. So question table is now done. Next is I want to do the answer choice here. So again I create a new entity called as answer choices and leave the defaults. In fact, I'll name this as probably answer choice. Add entity and give this a name answer choice and leave the default. There is an ID property like this. I want to create one more property here called as the answer text. So this is going to be answer text and it will be a string by default. The one thing I have to do is know the relationship between this question table and the answer table, right? I have to do that manually. So when I click on questions, I can say add association and say that, so it automatically finds out that there is a question and there is an answer choice and there is navigation property that's available there. So when I say okay, it finds out that probably question ID is what you would want to map. Because a question can have multiple answer choices, so it's finding out that question can have multiple answer choices. So question ID is a part of the answer choices now. So it has done that automatically for you. So your model is now ready. That's just a warning, you can ignore that. And once this model is ready, you can again do the same thing, add code generation item and give this model a name, and it will do the same work that we did earlier, right? So it has done that now. And here I can again say generate database from model, okay? So generate database from model will give me the option to generate the database. So this is obviously a new database, so we don't have it there, so you can see a new connection and give this a name, a server name for my connection string, and it will use my SQL authentication. So what I'm doing now, you are able to follow me, right? What I'm doing now is first I designed the database model and then creating database from that. And then here I'm saying that database name is going to be poll from model, right? It's obviously going to fail now because it's not existing currently. So it's going to fail. You can click OK, it will ask you to create it there. It's now creating this database. And now it says, do you want to save this in config file? Always useful. And it's now generating DDL statements for you, for the classes that you created there. When I click on finish, it actually gets all the DDL statements here. So I have the DDL statements for my database now. From here I can right click and say execute SQL. It opens up my SQL Management Studio. Everything is set there, so it now does the database creation there. When I go here to databases and go and refresh, I have the poll from model created here for me, and these are the two tables that are there currently. Questions and answer choices there. Interesting? So this is there. On top of this, I can go and create controller like what I did earlier, but I'll kind of skip it now because it's the same step again. I have to create a controller and then it will automatically do all the work for me, right? The last part of the demo which I wanted to showcase is the code first development, right? So what does code first do? Typically take your .NET classes that you generate, and then from that it will try to map it to the respective database tables there. And why is very powerful? Because you can do all your designing of entities on your class files, plain CLR objects, and then go ahead and generate database from that. That's why it's very, very powerful. Your database is under control of you because you say that these are the fields I want. DB administrators might feel offended, but that's the way Entity Framework works, code first works there. So how do I do that now? So when I say add new project and give this a name, EF code first. That's the name of the project there. Same step there, but only difference here is that we don't have a database, we don't have a model, nothing is there currently. It's a very simple data application, that's all there. And we have to work on the model initially, so we need a model for this. So let's start creating our model. We need a couple of classes. So the same sample, question, answer choices, same thing, right? So one class, we need to have a couple of classes here. So add class and give this a name, say question.cs. Right? I will increase this font size if required. Right? So I have a class called question, which I'm going to use there, and my database fields are going to be what I type here now. So I need an integer attribute, like I said earlier, and I need the question text which needs to come. That will again be a string attribute. That's string, and it's going to be question text. And what do I have in questions table, right? Questions will have a collection of answer choices, correct? Not necessarily in this table, but questions are always going to map to a list of answer choices, correct? And then there will be answers, and there will be answers stored somewhere else. But when you want to maintain a list of answer choices, you need a collection of answer choices, right? And I want to do a lazy loading of this, so I'm going to use public virtual I collection of answer choice, answer choices, right? That's my collection of answer choices there. So answer choice is obviously not there, so I have to generate that. I can go and generate a class from here and then say generate the class called answer choice. Okay? With me so far? Yeah. So answer choice is again there. It's not a public one, so I will make it public. And right. So question is kind of done. Public class question, public class answer choice. Here again I need the property for integer. Every table requires an ID property, so that will be the ID property here for me. And I need again the property for storing my question text, answer text. So it's going to be answer text, and this is going to be a string, right? So So far good. Same thing, right? Question has the ID and question text, answer has the ID and the question answer text there. The difference here now is that we need to tell this table that you have a relationship with question, right? And it's not complicated, it's a simple relationship. I don't know if you got that. So you can say public, question, get and set the attributes. Simple relationship, right? And what is the relationship identifier? Public, integer, question, ID. If you remember, this work was done for us automatically by the designer earlier. Now we are doing it manually. That's the only difference here. So we have the relationship defined between question and the answer choice there. Like I said earlier, you need a context also because it needs to tell or find out where is all this mapping now, right? So the context is going to be again a class file which we will create. So add class and give this a name, say poll context.cs. This context file needs to derive from the DB context, right? DB context needs to understand that this is going to be a code first development style, right? You can right click here and then say resolve and it will add the required assembly. Have you seen this feature? New feature in 2010. So this will do that work for you. And what I require is a collection of questions and answer choices now. That's the context that's going to store there, right? So I can use the same properties here. So this is going to be DB set of question and it will be a collection of questions and again it's going to be a DB set of answer choice, answer choices. So my property is defined for my context here. So three things we created, one class for question, one class for answer choice and one class for holding the context value there. So with this we can start creating our controller, right? And our controller is going to be questions controller and the model class for this is going to be question. Simple stuff, right? It's going to be question class and data context for this is going to be the poll context that we created there. Click on add. So it is now doing the same work. It is generating the controller, it is generating the view, all the things that it's doing automatically for you. If you see it's doing all the work, you can see that it's created all the things there. So controller is done now. Let's try running this once and see what it looks like. So questions is our controller that we created there. You can see it's giving me the UI, familiar UI for creating questions there. And you create a new question saying that should Dravid be in RCB team next year? Yeah, create. And okay, next question. Just one question. We'll just go with one question. And what happens if I close this and run this again? Will the question be available? Not available? How many will say available? One person. How many are not sure? Like me. Okay. There is no database defined so far. No, there is nothing there. There is no persistence there. So where will it go? Let's go and see questions now. Same question. Available. So let's go and create the answer choices also and then see where it's all hiding everything. Answer choices for this. Model class for this is going to be answer choice and it's going to be the same poll context. It remembers all the values there, right? So again it's doing same thing, controller creation, view creation automatically. In fact, this update is something that came in Mix this year. Earlier you have to manually create all the views yourself. You have to go a controller, right click and then say add view for every controller. Now when you create a controller, it will also add the views for you automatically. So MVC is kind of catching up with web forms, doing all the work for you but not yet there still. So answer choice is also there. Let's go and create some answer choices for this. Right? Answer choices for this. So again it remembers that question is again a relational table. Answer choice is, one option is yes, should Dravid be in the RCB team. The other option is yes, yes. Kind of tells, right? If you don't have a single player from Bangalore and play a match, it happens like this. So yes, yes, all this is done now, right? Sir? Yeah, very sad actually. So yeah. Questions, we are done. So questions answered there. So where is all this data being stored, right? Where? Session? SQL Server Compact Edition? No. No. C drive? No. Cloud? No. SQL Server? No. Express? Yes. But where is Express residing? If you go to C:program files here and go to C:program files, Microsoft SQL Server, MS SQL 1.0, the full path, it actually created the MDF file and LDF file for you. It created a SQL Express file called as Pole Context. That's what our name that we gave now. It went and created a database there. So code first by default will go and create a SQL Express database in the location of its choice. It basically goes and creates it in C:program file, SQL Server Express Edition 1.0 data folder. It will go and create a file like this. Okay. If you want to move this to SQL Server Enterprise Manager, you have to right click, remove the security properties and add it to database. You can attach database, you know that, right? Right click, attach database, you can do that there, right? By default, it went and created it here in the thing here. If you want it to use SQL C, right, I have to add the connection string. So I'll add this and show and then tell you what it means, right? For example, here I want to add it inside my, instead of SQL Server, SQL Express, I want it to add it in SQL C. This SQL Express string that you see there in the top is irrelevant. That's for the membership API. So here I am saying that this is going to be called as data directory and tell this. Now when I run this, will the questions be there? How many of you say yes? No? Okay. I again assume that the rest of people don't care about it. Questions will not be there because you have now changed the data provider now. You are saying that database is now changed, correct? So when you go and create a new question now and say that, how is webcam so far?
How did the context got to know that I have to go to the second connection string and not to the first one?
It's just my mission thing. I'll tell you later. I'll tell you, it's a very simple thing. I know. Answer choices and create a new option saying that webcams rocks. Right? And second option is so just okay. Right? Create new, better to have watched the benefit match. It's happening, no? Benefit match in West Indies. You can see that also. So 3 options I gave now. You close it here. So this was actually going and creating it in your SQL C there. If you go to app data here and go and do a show all files, you see there is a database created there now, survey date. Double click on this, it will open this in your Server Explorer. Right click on this, you can go and say show all table data. It will have the questions that you created now. Okay. So you can point it to use SQL CE also, right? You can do it for SQL Server also, but by default, you cannot create database on SQL Server unless you explicitly go and give permissions for NT authority. So if you have a database already there, it will go and create the tables for you. But if you don't have a database, it will throw error locally. You have to go and explicitly set permissions for NT authority network service, full rights on your database, right? Otherwise, it doesn't really care. It will go and create on SQL Server also. So how does it know about this? So the key here is the config file, what we specified here. We said that the name is going to be pole context and database is going to be survey.sdf file. That's what it knows the database. You asked the question, right? Earlier.
No, yeah. Earlier it was picking a different connection. The connection string name is different. Application services is picking. We didn't define that.
This is irrelevant. I told you already. This is irrelevant. Application services for membership API. If you remove that, it will still work. If you remove this and if you remove this again, it still goes and creates it in your SQL Server Express. So your question is, how does it know, right? 2 things. If you don't specify anything, it will take the context name, right? And then it will go and create a database here in this folder. That's what you see here. C:program files, SQL Server Express, all this place. It will go and create it here called as pole context, because this is the name of the context file that we have given in the Visual Studio. If you remember the context file here in the models, the name of the model context file is pole context. It will take this name. Correct? It will take this name. If you specify a connection string saying that it's going to be coming from SQL CE, then it will take the name whatever you give here. If you drop this database now and give it a different name, it will give a different name there. For example, here if I add this back and say this is going to be called as new.sdf file. I have to do a couple of things now. One is that I have to close the Server Explorer, and I have to go here and right click. First of all, I have to close the application. I have to go here, right click, and detach this, right? And then I can go and delete this database, right? Now when I run this, it went and created it here in the app data folder. Not yet done, so let's go and browse the controller. So where does it go? Okay, connection string, new.sdf file, okay. Yeah, it went and created a new.sdf file. You got the answer? Still not convinced? You wanted a different name? Different name? Okay. So this is doing that work, right? So you can also change this connection string to point it to SQL Server itself. Very simple stuff, server name, password, etc. You can do all this stuff there. So we have done all these questions. I want to just complete one small step here before we do the advanced passes here. One is that I have these questions and all, but I want to show the questions to the end users, right? I can do that by using a view model. So I'll go and create a view model. I'll do it quickly because I have some things to do as well. So class, I want to create a view model called as questions view model or question view model for this. And for this, I'll just copy the snippet. So question view model is going to be a simple class file. I'll explain what I'm doing here. A view model will look very similar to your .NET POCO class that we created just now. Only difference is it will not use virtual because it's not lazy loading from database. It's actually giving you a view model, that's all, right? So required is not there, so I can go ahead and say resolve this wherever it is. So I have a question, I have an answer choice, same thing like what I had earlier. This is the view model I want to use. And when I say view model, I have a view model now. I need a controller and I also need the view for it, right? So controller, I already have the home controller. I have to just change the controller to add a couple of things there. Let me add that quickly and tell you what I'm doing. So here I'm removing this index, and what I'm doing here is that I'm getting a collection of all the poll questions. So again, it does not understand what it is. So go and add this, it will do the work for you. So what I'm doing is I'll just quickly increase the font size. What I'm doing here is that I'm taking a handle of the poll context underscore DB, and then let me just rename this to, and then there is an index that's coming up there, and let me just rename this to simply DB. And this is actually getting the list of questions from the question view model. ID, question text, answer choices comes from the view model here. Let's build this once. Finally, our controller is also ready. The final thing we have to do is the view. So index view currently does nothing. It just says learn ASU.MVC, which you have seen for a long time now, right? Let's change this now. I want to add the view also for this. So quickly adding the code, and I'll explain this there. If I type this, it will take another 2 sessions for me. So I'll just quickly copy this and tell you what it does. Bunch of things. One is that I'm taking a reference of the model here. This has to be coming as EF code first dot models dot question view model, and I have the reference to all the script libraries here, and using the model summary, I am actually getting the list of records from the data. So what it's doing currently is that it's taking the question ID, and using the question ID, it's looking for all the answer choice options, looping through it and generating the answers, right? Simple for loop. If you copy paste, not if you type. So this should be fine, I guess. So let me just run once and see. So there are no questions currently because we dropped the database now. So if you go and create questions and create new question, is Skype acquisition, no, right? It's a career limiting move, I don't want to do. Let me do something simple. How is MVC3? Don't ask these questions, no? And how is Razor? Right, and answers will going to be simple answers. I want to show this because I want to show the view model. That's why I'm typing it again. So create new answer. Razor rocks is an answer. And next answer is, I use Gillette Vector Plus. Right. First thing that comes to my mind when I talk about Razer is only that. And MVC3, MVC2 was simpler. And I am happy with web forms. I think this is what you are all thinking about currently. And MVC3 rocks, right? So 3 options I created there, and when I go to home now, I get all the options now, right? So you can actually go and select here and click on vote. It will not do anything currently because I have not handled this now, but you can actually get the same thing. What you have to do in home is basically go and get the home controller post method and get all the values, that's all, right? That's how I have done this application that I again want to show you. Same thing, looks same, right? Same color, same, everything is same. But I had a lot of time to do that, that's the only thing. So here you can actually go and see the results or vote for yourself on the sessions here. All right. So yeah, you can see the results for the previous votes and you can go and vote it yourself as well. So this is something I can do there. So question is, what happens if my data model changes, right? We usually get data model change requests when you go for production. I think there should be one more field that comes there which tells last modified date, which we will never use in your life. That happens there many times, right? And what happens there? Let's see if I want to go and change something. I want to go to my context file here, sorry, question file here, and say that instead of, I also want to get a property which is date time, and it's going to be last modified date, right? NetDB framework will get angry now because it doesn't know this new thing, right? If you run this, it will throw an error. It doesn't know that change, right? It doesn't know, obviously it doesn't know change because you're making a change in the context now and it doesn't know that type. So there are 2 ways to handle it there. When you work with code first, there is always a risk. If you are changing data access, changing the class there, then you have to either handle it yourself or leave Entity Framework to regenerate database every time. What it means is that there are 2 options you can do here. You can go to global.asx file and say that here in the register routes here, in the application start event, you can say that, let me quickly copy it, I don't want to type it here. I can say database dot set initializer to null. What it means is that I am saying that database dot set database again has to be resolved, so I will go and resolve it quickly. And poll context has to be resolved to use the models, right? So database dot set initializer poll context to null, which means saying that you don't do anything, don't generate database and all, keep quiet, I'll do it myself. That's what I'm saying there, right? So when I run this now, it will not create database again, it will expect you to have the table field added automatically for you, okay? So challenge here is that you have to go and manually add the view, add in the view. So for example, in the index view, right, what you see here is basically item for question text, that's the only thing you see here currently. Or if you, for example, if you go to the edit view, you only see that I have a label for question text and the editor for the question text. That's all I have there. So I don't have the editor for the date time there now, right? So I can do it in multiple ways. I can do a force of this using the what is that? Codes library package manager. I can go ahead and do it from package manager console. I can run this again and say that generate this again using the MVC scaffold. I showed it already in the previous session, right? That you can do. Or you can say that I will go and create it myself. Like I will go to the database myself and say I want to add a new column. Like here I can go and say the questions is going to be table properties and column, and I want to add a new column. I can go and add it here. One second, I'll just go with it here. Edit table schema, and I want to add last modified date, and this is going to be of type date time. Where is that? Date time, and say that this will be probably nullable or whatever it is. You can. So once I do that, I say that I will take care of this database changes there. So let's run this one and see if it works fine. It still has to change. It can have null value, so you have to go and set the value to properly value there. That you have to do there. Or the other thing that you can do is you can say there and run this now. And go to questions. Obviously database is now changed, so it works fine now, right? I still haven't modified the view, so I won't get the entry for date here. I have to do that manually. But once I do that, I can add the new column there. So the only problem in this approach is that if you have some lookup values, it will go away, first of all. You can add the lookup values from here. You can go and add the lookup values from the context file here. For example, you can go to the whole context here and say that this is going to have a set of lookup values here. You can add that here. But if you are having existing data that is from the application, that will be lost, definitely. It's not a great approach there. So I think the best way is that you have a confirmed design pattern that you want to use, create all the classes there, and if there's going to be a modification, then go and set it to null and change the database table yourself. That will be the easiest way to do it there, instead of dropping it every time there. But what we are working on currently is also the ability to go and change the schema instead of just dropping the table. That we are working on currently. That is not yet out there. EF Code First 4.1 currently supports two approaches. You can generate database, or you can go and change it yourself and then configure it to use the new view, right? So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. Questions? Yeah.
How do you put validators?
What's the advantage of including the table in the app data? Because it's always there in memory, right?
Yes.
So instead of that, if we don't specify it in app, config the database connection, then it is there in the MySQL Express, right?
SQL Express.
Yeah, so what's the difference between these two?
No, so clearly I told, no, SQL CE is if you want to just have your own database, which is like a simple database for maintaining values, etc. If you want to use SQL Express, you can use it. There is no, I mean, there's no, there's.
By default, it is getting in there. If I don't specify the
correct, it will go there, correct.
Web.config, if I don't specify the connection string.
Yes.
So what's the, but if I specify the connection string in the web.config, it is there always in memory, right?
Which it is in memory only when you are accessing the application. It's not there every time. When your application is running, when it goes to the home, it will not have it in memory. When you make a request for questions, and if there is a data already there, then it will load it in memory. SQL CE by nature will load it in memory only. That's the nature of SQL CE. But not whenever you open the application, but whenever you access the application data, it will load the database in memory so that it is available for you to access it. It's like data set. Data set is in memory, correct? So that's what it does there. I just showed that different databases can be used. If you don't specify anything, it will go to SQL Express by default. If you specify a connection string, it can go to SQL CE or SQL Server based on what you want to do.
How do we make a column unique?
That you can do it in the database, no?
How?
Which one?
Unique. How can you?
So by default, when you say integer ID, Unity Framework will think it's a primary key and unique by default. Okay. You can also open the designer and change it after database is decided. After database is generated, you can open it and change it also.
Okay. It required, and again, default value, we can all set.
You can do all the things, yes. Lookup values you can set, yes.
How about table valid functions? Can we call them using Unity Framework?
Like you want to do calculations?
No, table valued functions from SQL Server.
I don't think you can do that.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
Store procedures?
No, not
No.
yet.
I think stored procedures we can.
Stored procedure you can go and, so this one is doing only one thing. It is not creating database types, it's creating database, that's all. It creates database and tables because that's the only type available for storing data. On top of it, once database is generated, you can go and add views, tables, etc. It doesn't really matter for it. Yeah.
Whenever it runs, it will always check for the database exists or not, and then table schema you need to check.
Correct. So that's why if you say null, it will not do that. No, that's why if you say null, if you say set it to null, it will not go and do the check. It will think that you are taking care of database. So when you go to production, I think it's best to go to and set it to null because you know that when you go to production, you are not going to change the schema, at least after you deploy it. No? Before deploying, it's fine. After deployment, you won't change it there. After deployment, you can make it to, you can put it just before deploying to null. So it will not do that work for you.
How do you put the validation controls, client-side validation for the?
So validation is already there. If anything is marked as non-nullable field, it will automatically think it's a non-nullable field. For example, question text. That you can add it in the view, no? There is a view there. I'll show it to you one second. So when you go to questions here, and if questions is marked as not a nullable thing there and submit it there, it will throw in validation. It's not marked there, so it's not showing there. If it's a non-nullable field in database, it will show it there. And you can do any other validation right from here. For example, here I can go to the index view and add all validations here. What's the big deal?
But how do we do it? Because I don't have, like normally I would put the ID of my text box or something like that, right?
There is no ID here. For example, there is a text here and there is a display item here. It's not in the index. When you go and do a create, there is a text box here. HTML editor for is there, no? There you can actually go and add a validator for this. You are getting it? You can add validations in this place where you enter the value. You can put a validator, jQuery validator you can use for doing all the validations. It will do that automatically for you.
What will be the ID? Is that what it pass?
1 second. So there is already a validation message available there, but only thing is question text is not as a not nullable field. That's the only thing there. Let me open the other one which we created where we had it already there. EF database first. There if you go to the views here and go to say a create view of the question, it's just using model.question text. That's what is required currently. So think about it. It doesn't have the text ID or anything of that control. It doesn't have that there, right? It does validation at a model level, not at a control level. So when you fill this value and go and submit, the first check it is going to do is if the model is valid or not. And the model will not be valid if you don't enter a value there. So if you see the model validation that is generated here, it is actually checking model.question text. Is it a non-nullable field? If so, generate a validator accordingly. It's a required field validator. Did you get the answer for this? You don't need to specify the ID. There is no ID there as such. Okay.
Let's say I want to, this is the email.
Right.
It's an email text box. So I have to use a regular
You can add a custom validation for this. You can even, if you can remove this editor for and put a simple HTML.text
for
box.
the ID. Any validator I use, even jQuery or JavaScript, it will ask me the ID of the text box to validate it.
I need to check on that thing. I don't know about that yet.
How many models can I have? I mean, how many entities can I have in one EDMX?
Multiple, no? I had 2. You can have multiple, no?
Like, I have a client with 250 tables. So can I have all in one?
Yeah, 250 tables, you have 250 classes for that. Each of them are separate classes.
Yeah, is it a good approach to have all the things in one, or do you suggest to
Which one
split
is
it?
having 250 tables or working with NDFM? Which one is a good approach?
See, like you said, lookup values, right?
Yeah.
So each screen can have a
Got
more
it.
than
Yeah.
2
So
or 3 lookups.
there is no limitation from Entity Framework side for doing this work there.
Okay.
But if you are using the default option, which is creating database on the fly, then it's always going to create 150 tables on the fly, which is probably not a great approach. Then you have to create tables yourself and just do the mapping part. You can go to the global.asx and set it to null and say that don't do the database generation, I'll do it myself.
Okay. And we were working with a disconnected architecture.
Yeah.
And we were not able to handle the object state.
Yeah.
And when you try to add the reference of the service, so when I'm using the WCF service and using these models, so if I assume that okay, I have 5 tables in one model.
Yeah.
So this self-tracking entities, I was
Self-tracking entities is the approach for the correct. That's the correct thing to do. Yes.
So the reference, whatever I'm creating, is not consistent. So for example, I have 2 models, so model 1 and model 2. So that if there is a table common in both the models,
Okay.
so that reference was giving different naming conventions when you build for the different scenarios or with the different systems.
Okay.
So
We need to talk on this separately on this. It's like a little one-to-one.
Yeah.